Let's go. Good morning, Tim Duggan. Thanks for joining us here on Yellow Shelf.
Thank you for having me.
Tim, show us your new book, which was only launched yesterday.
This is Work Backwards, which I'm so excited to launch and get out to the world.
Look, I'm sure you're a really busy human at the moment, so thanks for talking to us. I'm just going to hand over to you to tell the Yellow Shelf audience, what do we need to know about your new book?
So thank you very much. This is called Work Backwards, and it is my third book that I've written, but it's probably the most important book I've ever written. And that is because it is all about how we work. And by extension, we can't talk about work without talking about how we live. So Work Backwards is a book that is all about the future of work. And the future of work is this giant, massive topic that I've spent the last few years really trying to understand. So I've been reading hundreds of research papers. I've been traveling the world, speaking to some of the top scientists in meaning at work, happiness at work, burnout, all of these topics that are really important, and trying to chart a way through it to find an angle that can help any individual really make sense of where all of this is going. So I think for all of us, the COVID years were a pretty discombobulating time that made all of us, certainly the research shows, made many people reconsider their own relationship to work. And I know for myself personally, I started thinking about all of this during the COVID years after leaving the business that I'd co-founded after 15 years, after my dad dying. All these things coalesced for me, and I started experimenting with what work looked like, and could I work from a camper van for 6 months, which I did. Could I work from the Northern Territory for 6 months, which I did. Could I work as I traveled around Europe with my husband, which we did. And now we live in Mallorca, and I write there, I think deeply, and one of the things I'm most proud of is Work Backwards and how I've found a way through all of this noise to write this book.
Yeah, and look, I just want to touch on your previous books because I've read them both. Cult Status and Killer Thinking. So tell us, I know you touched on what inspired you to write the book and events, I guess, and impacts. Tell us a bit about your background, Tim. Like, I'm curious, you mentioned you're a co-founder. Do you want to just sort of tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I co-founded a media company in Australia called Junkee Media. And Junkee Media was the Australian equivalent, in a really rough sense, of BuzzFeed or Vice, in that it was pop culture and news for young Australians. And it was a really wonderful business. It still is a wonderful business. I just no longer work there. And after 15 years, we built it up to about 60 or 70 full-time staff. Sold it in 2016, and then I left in 2020. And one of the things that I did in the last few years before I left was started to think about how I can communicate some of those lessons of myself building that business. But then also my first book, Cult Status, was all about how to build a really strong community around your business. And for me, it was reconnecting to my love of words and journalism. I used to be a journalist for Rolling Stone in my early 20s before I started creating websites. So it was really lovely to reconnect with writing, and Cult Status came out in 2020, and it was really amazing just to spend so long on a big project like that and try and distill down really complicated ideas into, I love steps, I love practical exercise at the end of each chapter. Yeah. And that led to my second book, Killer Thinking, which is all about creativity in the workplace. Yep. And that was in particular in a post-COVID world. How can we do creativity when we're on Zoom and some people are in the office and some people are not? And that was a really wonderful experience. And now, a few years later, it's all about Work Backwards, which is how we can work better. Like most of my books, it's super accessible. So the idea of all of my writing is I try to inspire people and give people lots of stories and make it interesting and make it really easy to read. And then I try and distill it down into, okay, you've been inspired, you know what you want to do, you know what you should do, but how the hell do you do it? And so I put at the end of each of my chapters IRL exercises, which stands for in real life. And there are a bunch of really easy exercises that anyone can do.
Ah, awesome. And so if we're a Yellow Shelf subscriber and we're curious, What, and we know that we're kind of working the wrong way around. We're working backwards, and we need some help. What's a quick takeaway that you can give before we go and dive into your book? Got any lasting comments?
Yeah, so work backwards is basically about, it's an invitation to listeners to break out of the way that we normally think about work. I think we have so many preconceived notions around how we should work, why we should work, how long we should work, where we should work from. COVID shook a lot of those up. And then now I think we're just starting to deal with the ramifications of what that means in the long term. So my invitation to anyone listening is to try to drop some of those preconceived notions that you have about work. Come into this with a really open mind, and you think you might be surprised at what some of the research is actually saying. There's a lot of really counterintuitive insights and advice inside Work Backwards. And that's one thing I just am really excited for people to pick up the book and read. Some of the very early feedback I've had, one of the first readers is Hugh Van Cuylenberg, who wrote a wonderful book in Australia called The Resilience Project, which was very successful.
Yeah.
And Hugh endorsed this book and wrote some lovely words for it. And he told me when he was reading it that he had to stop reading it at night before he went to bed. It was making him think too much.
Yeah.
And he was having trouble sleeping because of all these ideas going through his head. So as an author, if I'm able to communicate, make people think, make people stop in their tracks, that to me is job done. And that is what I really hope that Work Backwards can do for people.
Oh, look, I can't wait to connect with this new book. I know it was only released yesterday, so I'm heading out this weekend to pick it up. Tim, what's the best way to connect with you? If we like, do we have socials that we can follow you on? I'll put them in our show notes, but let's give a shout out to the best way to connect with you if we're curious.
Yeah, and so my website is Tim Duggan, TIMDUGGAN.com.au, because I am an Australian author first and foremost. And Work Backwards actually has its own website, workbackwards.com. And at workbackwards.com, you can get worksheets to go along with the book, some free resources to download. There's even a budget template about one of the ideas that we talk about. So I'm very big on just trying to give out as many free resources as possible to people, because ultimately, once someone has read one of these books and gets inspired, the biggest compliment you can give an author is to then put it into practice and actually use it to help change your life. And that's what I really want people.
Well, that's a perfect lasting goodbye from us. Thank you for joining us today, Tim. Good luck with the book. And, keep writing books, because they'll keep lining up on my bookshelf. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I saw last night at my book launch, someone posted that this was the Tim Duggan trilogy, is what they said, because I had all three books, and I certainly wasn't written as a trilogy, but Jesus, I love that. That's amazing.
Oh, awesome. Tim, thank you so much for your time today. All the best.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.